Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eric Berger, who is the CTO of the FCC, and who's going to talk about how to make a difference, communication protocols and regulatory protocols. This is extremely important to all of us working on protocols, and we are really interested in finding out how to make a difference. So thanks, Eric.
Okay.
Also, he's an IIT graduate.
That's right. We'll just say that every now and then. Right? Thank you, Carol. Thank you all. I hate it when people do this, but this is something to not miss. So I hate it when people put up a slide and then read it to you. But I'm going to read this, and this is the only one I'm going to read to you. So, and especially now, there may not be anything so important as participating in democracy. And most people think of participating in democracy as voting, but it's not just voting, but lending your expertise when society needs it. And this isn't just Eric talking. Many of you, we have a co-resident IEEE program right now. This is baked into the IEEE professional ethics policies. It's baked into the Association for Computing Machinery ethics policies, is to basically help when you need help. Now, you probably noticed there was a little, oh my goodness, let's get this presentation done, because I wasn't going to do slides, because when I am doing more of the policy-oriented stuff, I try to leave no trail. But I also realized for people to understand how they can help, they need to understand a bit of the process, how rules get made in the United States. So I'm going to give you what at Georgetown Law is typically a 1-semester, 3-credit class that you then go do an internship on. We're going to do it in one slide. So, so really easy, right? This is a description of the Administrative Procedures Act. This is the law that all regulatory agencies kowtow to, bow down to. And it's basically, and for those of you who are old enough, I'm just a bill. So the bill becomes law. What then? This is the what then after the bill becomes a law. And by the way, as I will make a pitch for working with agencies, you get to meet and work with really, really interesting and smart people. This slide was put together by Bob Cannon, and people who've been around internet policy circles in particular may know that name. He runs a website and a list called Cyber Telecom. It's where the lawyers, policy, and technologists that are interested in law and policy come together. Initially, it was around communications, but then around the internet thing, and now around everything. So how do things become a rule? Well, one thing is this bottom path. Congress passes a bill, they have their hearings, and you end up with a law. The FCC is an independent agency. We don't do things that the president feels like, and that's not just this president. The last president was upset that the FCC didn't do what he was trying to tell them to do because we're independent. However, we do answer to Congress. So if Congress says, go do something, we go do it. Now the thing is that quite often those laws kind of have 3 flavors. One flavor is, we have this policy goal, you guys figure it out. Well, actually 2 flavors. The other flavor is do this, where Congress writes in the law how you're going to get something done. Most of the time, industry prefers the you guys figure it out because, we are talking a bunch of lawyers. Actually, it used to be typical. It's not quite so typical, but, if you randomly picked some Congress people, they might have a bachelor's degree in history and own a chain of car stores, car dealerships. And so do you want them to write your communication policy laws of what you do? But they might be writing laws like, we want everyone to have broadband. We want everyone to be able to afford communication services, and then you guys figure it out. So that's one path. But another path, this optional bit here, you can petition. So again, with the FCC, you can file a petition asking for either a new rule, to change a rule, or to get rid of an old obsolete rule. And there's basically it's like a form you fill out, and the commission, actually it's in the Communications Act, we have to respond within a certain period of time. Now, of course, the response can be, so what? But usually the response is, yeah, let's think about making a rulemaking. The other path for getting a rule is we might think, hey, there's something that needs to be done. We've got these old rules that probably need to go away, but we want to make sure that they really do need to go away, and then we want to figure out what to replace them with or just to get rid of them. So we'll do what's called a notice of inquiry. So we'll publish this notice saying, hey, we're thinking about bit. What do you think? And so we go out and get comments, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. With the results of that notice of inquiry, we'll do a report and say, this is what we found. Now, quite often we'll combine documents. It might be a report and notice of proposed rulemaking, where we'll say we did the notice, we got this information, based on this information, this is what we would like to do. We want to repeal this set of regulations. We want to modify that set of regulations. We want to create this new class of regulations. So we'll give notice. We'll say, hey, this is what we want to do. What do you think? And so we're asking for comments, which I promise I will talk about next. Based on those comments, we may issue an order or a declaratory ruling saying, all right, based on what we said we were thinking of and based on the comments we got, this is what we are really enacting. This is what's going on. That green area, that's like the letter of the Administrative Procedures Act, and that has the rules about proper notice. We're not allowed to say, hey, we're going to have notice on what flavor ice cream to have in the cafeteria, and then come out with a rule that says all cell phones have to be purple, right? Basically the notice has to deal, with the actual rule, things like that. Now notice there's a bit of lather, rinse, repeat. We also might say based on the comments we're actually not going to do anything. Maybe we'll do another notice. We might do a further notice of proposed rulemaking. We thought we were going to boil the ocean, but we only boiled a lake. So here's the rules for the lake, and we're going to think a little bit more about the sea in this next pass around. Somebody brought up yesterday, okay, so we've got a rule. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's enforcement now. How do you enforce the rule? Do you enforce the rule? Oh, by the way, at a lot of these spots, then the courts get involved. The court might say, that rule, when you made that rule, you didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act. That is like the nightmare that all the lawyers are paranoid about. Are we following all the steps? The order can be appealed. When we do an enforcement action, that enforcement action can be appealed. And oh, by the way, they can look at it and say, yeah, the rule is good, fine, enforce it. Or they might say, you know what, the rule's not right. There famously was a DC District Court ruling came out last week, which no matter what your politics are, I would encourage you to read it because it's hilarious. The judges had like a super sense of humor when they wrote their opinion there. So you just got $180,000 worth of Georgetown law education. Unfortunately, you still have to pass the bar to do it, and I'm definitely a neophyte when it comes to this. So why did I blab on about that? You notice how at almost every step I said comments. This is a live shot from this morning of what we call the electronic comment filing system, or ECFS. And in fact, I figured I would take a screenshot of an open item that's near and dear to our hearts in the matter of advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls. So right now we're talking about like a stir-shaken mandate. So something very important here. On the one hand, you see two industry associations, a company, and actually a liaison from our Consumer Advisory Committee. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, what's this got to do with me? I'm not an industry association. I'm not a company. And the important thing is, if I scroll down, you would actually see a lot of stuff from people. Individuals. Anyone can make comments. And more importantly, anyone can make reply comments. And that's important too. I worked on an item when I first got to the FCC where there was like just one comment on a facet of the rule we were working on, and that comment was dead wrong. It was like this person did not know what they were talking about. And when I saw a draft of the rule, they were saying, well, based on this comment, we're doing this. I'm like, whoa, you can't do that. It's like dead wrong. And they're like, well, where in the record does it say it's not dead wrong? Like, everybody knows it's not dead wrong. If it's not in the record, it doesn't exist. Unless, of course, it's like in a textbook. And this was a thing that was like so wrong, no one would write a textbook saying, don't believe this wrong thing, because no one would even think of saying it. Now it happened, all right, so a few phone calls were made, and all of a sudden there were like 4 reply comments. But it is important to look at what comments are there, if you think that this is like really wrong. And then, yeah, it's lawyers doing the law thing, the adversarial model. Sometimes you get very reasonable, very learned people who disagree on the policy. And because they disagree on the policy, they will say, well, my interpretation of what the law says or the rule says is this. And the other person says, well, my interpretation is that. Well, they both have it. They both give their arguments. And then at the end of the day, the lawyers will decide. And again, if people disagree, rule gets challenged, goes to the courts, and then you have your courts decide for you. Much better to get all the comments in so we can have an informed decision. So you might ask, what happens to the comments? And for most items, people actually read them. Lawyers, this is one of the great uses of interns that I found at the commission. Like, people will read them and then summarize the issues. Now, yes, famously we had a particular item that had, like 24 million comments. That was probably machine triaged before people looked at it. Most items at the FCC get maybe 60 comments. So it's actually not unrealistic to have people, actually look at the comments. Now, the Administrative Procedure Act, and this is part of the rules, says that all the substantive issues raised in the comments that were received before the comment deadline, and there is a, please comment by, and then there's a reply comments are due, some period of time after that. So anything that's received before those deadlines, the issues have to be addressed. And again, like if we look at that popular item, somebody did an analysis and like 17 million said, I don't like this rule. So, we didn't have to do 17 million, too bad for you. We could just once say too bad for you, but we had to address it. Again, in the more normal proceedings, you get these issues, and quite often, again, as we're now talking about experts, people will see the same thing and they'll all comment on it. We don't need to say, yeah, all right, we get it. We just do it once. But that's the other thing, a little known secret, is so the APA says the agency must address the issues before the deadline, but also if something is brought to our attention after the deadline, then we may address it. And that happened on an item that I worked on a couple of months ago, where, in fact, when the draft rule was published, somebody went, oh, wait a minute, that's like dead broken. And we went, oh, golly gee, you're right. So it's not like you missed the deadline, too bad for you. But then there's no requirement. So let's give an example. Something I talked about from right this position almost exactly a year ago. I talked about how we had this notice out on Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act. So this was a congressional mandate. So again, back to how the rules made, Congress said, go do this. And the go do this that they said was, for a multi-line telephone system, you have to be able to direct dial 911. You have to send what we call dispatchable location. How do you find that person in the building? And you have to give notification to somebody from that building, from that enterprise, saying that somebody dialed 911. And we got comments from public safety providers saying, oh, we got to have this. Enterprises saying, oh my goodness, you're going to put us out of business. Governments, wow, this is really important. And by the way, some governments said, by the way, take a look, like Illinois had rules that were pretty similar to what the congressional laws were. Texas was first. We call it Kerry's Law. There's a Texas Kerry's Law that predates the federal one by 2 years. So an interesting takeaway that came from the comments, there was some concern that, like in Avaya, they sell a 10,000 line PBX. Of course, that's going to have notifications and stuff. But what about a hosted cloud PBX? That was like my motivation last year for talking about it, was to get some people here who build those things. And it turned out from the comments coming back is most of them already noticed when you physically moved your device, so they could say, hey, where are you? So that when you dialed 911, they would have the dispatchable location. And most of them, even the ones that were selling, like targeted to Soho, because I was kind of like, oh, come on, how can we have a rule like this? If I had, a digital voice service from my cable company, and I ran a consulting business out of my house, my wife runs her therapy business out of the house, that's a 2-line telephone system, it would be covered by this law. And what, notification makes no sense. And it turned out that most of these hosted VoIP companies would already send out an email when someone dials 911, because they found out that more often than not it was somebody butt dialing 911. And so that they were then able to say, oh, wait a minute, there's no issue here, and they could call the PSAP and say, hey, everything's okay. Or they would actually know that, and the purpose of the rule, so that they could come to the aid possibly faster. So it turned out that what we were thinking, well, maybe we'll have an exemption for small, we didn't need it. And we learned that through the comment process from the people who are actually building these things. Now you might wonder, why do we care about burden on a rule like this where we're saving lives? How can you say that it's too expensive? Well, first a bit on process. Executive branch agencies, I think it was Reagan, and then reaffirmed by Bush and reaffirmed by Clinton, you will do cost-benefit analyses when you do a rule. The example I like to give as a pilot is the rule that if you fly around the DC area, you have to take special training. And they said this is going to cost the pilot community about $700,000 in terms of the time it takes to take this training. And that assumed everybody did it, which isn't going to happen because not everyone flies in the DC area. And on the benefit side, it'll save $18 million a year from not having to scramble F-15s or the attack helicopters, not counting the collateral damage. And the collateral damage was not the dead pilot. It was if the bits of the plane happened to hit somebody. To which I was like, sign me up, I'll take that class. But what if a rule that saves lives turns out to cost more lives? We did an item, one of the first items, the blue law. So we got amber alerts and silver alerts and presidential alerts. We now have blue alerts. And the thing is, it turned out, the cost was trivial, the benefit was trivially minimal, but the cost was, immeasurably small. But let's say if we went to implement it, and it turned out the technology was such, you needed to put a new antenna on all the radio towers. And so when you're doing the cost, it's not just, wow, that's expensive. You also think about, and we saw this when we did the TV repack, and like 2 or 3 people will probably fall off the tower and die. So, you save one person every 2 or 3 years, but 3 people are going to die doing it. And so you'd say, you know what? Even though this rule would save lives, the cost benefit says maybe we ought not do it. So that's why it's important. That's why even with things that are so obviously saving lives, we'll still do a cost-benefit analysis. The FCC voluntarily, under the chairman in this commission, is now voluntarily doing cost-benefit analyses. And so one thing I want to emphasize with like the Kerry's Law and Ray Bounds, the final rule was better because we got informed comments. We found out that we could actually have a uniform law. We found out that everybody could be covered. And that, by the way, increased the benefit side of the law as well. A little carrot here. One of those small hosted VoIP providers, they filed their comments, and what happens in the rule is we don't just take the comments and make the rule. If you look at any of these rules, it'll be on any typical page, it'll be like 2 inches of text and 7 inches of footnotes. And in the 7 inches of footnotes on this one, when we said basically this applies to everyone, we could footnote the particular company, as noted in the comments filed by in the particular company name. So from a transparency point of view, of course you want that because, who told you that? What are their motivations, whatever. But then they got bragging rights. Hey, we helped save lives by our hosted VoIP service. So, there's some incentive, especially if you're working in a corporation and they're hesitant about letting you file comments. You can say, hey, but we can get some good mileage out of this. Another example, of course, our favorite, robocalls. So this is a long time open docket, and we've done a number of rules on this docket. What's out right now, the latest one, is about mandating shake and stir. Actually, let me make a little detour on this. So the approach of this commission has been to allow industry to voluntarily develop, design, and implement shaken and stir. And I'll put in a pitch. Chris, I think tomorrow you're giving the shake and stir pitch. Yeah, so for the 4 people in here who have no idea what I'm talking about, come to Chris's thing tomorrow, do the deep dive. If we were to have done this as a rulemaking, so I started 2 years ago, my term is up at the end of the month. If we'd started 2 years ago, we would actually be, from a rulemaking perspective, right where we are. We just released this notice of proposed rulemaking to mandate stir and shaken, and sometime late next year or the year after, or after the court cases, the year after that, we might have authenticated signaling. Or we can let industry do it on their own, and it'll be done by November. It'll be done by November, since your boss's boss has publicly said, in fact, a lot of bosses' bosses. So, why did it need to be a mandate? Because everyone wants to go last. Or we twist some arms, get enough people to say yes, and then people have the confidence it's going to happen, and then nobody wants to be last. But in the event that industry falls down, we do have it teed up, and it's going to be a mandate. And again, which would you prefer? That industry, like literally, not people like you, people in this room develop these standards and figure out how to implement it, or have a bunch of FCC lawyers figure out what you're going to do. Exactly. Now, some comments that, and this is an open docket, please comment on it. Some comments are helpful. Like it turns out there are ILECs and CLECs in mostly rural areas that are all IP. They are SIP-based networks. And when they get to the edge of the village, they connect to the backbone of our telephone network, and the only interconnect they can get is SS7. So they're, and some of them actually are starting to play with signing their calls, but once it gets to the edge of their network, it stops. Those comments are very, very helpful because it allows us to figure out how to get IP interconnect everywhere. Some comments are not that helpful. So there are things like, oh my goodness, you know, there's going to be like one SS7 circuit left out there, and because the stir token gets lost over that network, we shouldn't deploy anything. We should wait for like another 20 or 30 years before we deploy. Not quite helpful, but you know, if that's your perspective, put it in. That'll be a comment that probably will be footnoted saying, you know, company Dinosaur has noted, because again, we have to address all issues, has noted that, you know, they suggest we should not make this rule because it's only going to work like 98% of the time, not 100% of the time. But we respectfully decline, and we're still doing the rule. You know, we've addressed the issue. Just because you raise the issue doesn't mean we have to agree with you. And so really, comments and reply comments from engineers would be very helpful. So who can comment? Again, said in the beginning, say it now. Not just companies or lawyers. We get lots of submissions by individuals and academics. I mean, there was an item before I got to about 2 years before I got to the FCC. I filed 3 sets of comments. I filed sets of comments on behalf of Research Center, on behalf of Georgetown, and there were a bunch of typos in it. So I filed comments as Eric Berger saying, hey, by the way, this stuff is... And actually, in that rulemaking, I was quoted, I think, about 14 times. Now, 12 of those times where Dr. Berger, you know, raises this issue, it's kind of reasonable, but we choose not to do it. Twice they said, Dr. Berger raised this issue, we agree with him, this is why, instead of what we had in our notice, this is what we're doing in our final rule. So, you know, it really does make a difference. While I'm picking on people, Fletch, can anyone just walk into the FCC and have a talk with staff or the chairman or commissioners?
With an appointment.
Just in case anyone missed that.
Yes, with an appointment.
And can you get an appointment?
I tweeted and got an appointment.
Yeah. So really, and I can't speak for other agencies, but the FCC is incredibly open. You know, ask and you'll probably get a meeting. David's going like, no, don't hand out my thing if they're interested in public safety. And he answers his phone. There you go. So call if you have an issue, file comments. We have a thing called, and again, this is a federal rule. It's called a FACA, Federal Advisory Committee Act, which allows agencies to kind of build an advisory committee. The FCC is so into it, we're at our statutory limit. No more, you know, we have to make things fit into our existing FACAs. You know, serving on a committee, there's a lot of complications of doing it, but it's possible as a voting member, but then they have work groups. So I will make another pitch, which should be near and dear to most people here, especially if you're doing web RTC. We have the interoperable video calling work group. And the interoperable video calling work group is looking at services that use North American numbering plan numbers that interoperate over the public network, so that those services will be interoperable. Whether it's Comcast, AT&T, Skype, FaceTime. Now again, we're not regulating Skype or FaceTime. We're saying, you know, if they are interconnected to the public network. Very important work, not just because it's like SMS. Once people got out of the silo of SMS, oh my goodness, it's not going to be our own walled garden, and all of a sudden usage exploded. We would expect a similar thing there, but it's also very important, again, for the public safety community and the disability rights community, that we expect to like dramatically lower the cost and increase the availability of like video interpretation services for the deaf and hard of hearing calling. PSAPs are just calling people in general. Of course, there's like the ultimate Henning and you can work there. And Henning more so than me, it is addictive. You know, I was there for 1 year. I was going to do my year, and all right, I'll extend for another year. Do my 2 years. I'm really, really done. All right, I've extended for a month, but no, really, I'm done at the month. There is a successor in the wings, but it is so easy to come back because you do make a difference. You do change lives. You do save lives, and you know, hopefully make the world a better place. So. Sorry to gross you out before lunch. I've talked about the sausage making, so now that you've seen how the sausage is made, please help make tasty sausage. You can obviously work for the agency, serve on an advisory committee or a work group. Please comment on open items. You can do it from the comfort of your browser, and visit if there's something that's important to you. The only thing we ask is if it's on an open docket, you have to file an ex parte, you know, because sunshine laws, we don't want deals made in back rooms. And if it's not an open docket, then it's up to you whether you want to file. Most often people do because they're asking for something. So again, if it's not in the record, it doesn't exist. So you want to get your ex parte in. So with that, I believe I'm on time. Or am I half an hour early?
You get a half an hour.
I get a half an hour. Well, in that case, does anyone have any questions? I got a question back there while the microphone's going in the back. It's www.fcc.gov/ECFS. And for the IVC work group, just Google Nancy, N-A-N-C, or FCC, Nancy, N-A-N-C, IVC, and that'll get you information on that. Please.
Yeah, hi. I'm Kalpesh from AT&T Systems. I had a question. Why is Facebook and WhatsApp calls not regulated, or they don't have any law enforcement implications, right?
Yeah, so you know, just at a high level, and the FCC and a number of our rulemakings have made clear, you know, we don't regulate applications. You know, full stop. Where our jurisdiction starts is if you're doing an application that interoperates. We call it interconnected VoIP, or now interconnected video and VoIP. So if you're using telephone numbers and offering a service that lets people, you know, call other people with that telephone number through the public network. So again, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram use telephone numbers, but they're not using the public network. But like Skype out, Google Duo to a number, those do. And in fact, for our latest rulemaking, so now it's out, our rewrite of, actually, the rewrite of Part 9 is out. That's done, right? Yeah, okay, I can talk about that. So Alexa, Google Home, they let you, you know, call grandma. And it turns out, again, the disability community, blind community uses that a lot just as a dialer. So why can't you dial 911? Well, now, when the rule is in effect, we passed the rule that basically says people have this expectation. If you can call a phone number, one of those numbers should be 911. As far as CALIA and all that, I don't know. I have no idea. Dean? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were carrying the thing. No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm not that smart. Does it on? So I don't know if this is a popular question, but I think everybody has it on net neutrality, right? And FCC has come out and said we don't support it and whatnot. So where does 5G position itself in terms of its design, in terms of keeping the net neutral and the data channels accessible to as many services as possible, people as possible? So.
Right. So, I hear it might rain later this afternoon. And I also cannot talk on behalf of the FCC, the Commission, or staff, or the U.S. government. What's the litany?
Thanks, Eric. Both for voice, but especially for video, do you think that the concept of a call is a useful one to keep in perpetuity, where a call has a very defined behavioral context of person A initiates a communications instance to persons B or C, which then notifies them with a ringtone or something else, they pick it up, and there's a whole set of behavioral characteristics around that, rather than a sort of meet me scenario or ambient voice and video where you've got a, or push to talk. So do we get hung up, or should we get hung up on this word call, or are you looking to broaden it to communications?
I love, do we get hung up on calls?
Oh,
Should we hang up the call?
That pun was unintentional, but I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, Dean, I see another blog coming. By you, not by me. That's a good question. It's already something we've been grappling with for, Pulver Order was over a decade ago. So, almost 20 years, just even when it's still pick up a phone and dial a number, wrapping our head around, well, it's an internet thing, which we don't want to regulate at all. And yet it's a thing that looks, smells, and tastes like a traditional phone. And so people have expectations of some of the things you can always do with a phone. That will feed my research life at Georgetown for the next 10 years. I think, thank you for bringing that up. That's a good kind of futurist question is, what does it mean to talk about calls? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Dr. Berger, when you have policy and rules, and then you have someone that breaks that rule, there have been large fines that have been applied, and there is an enforcement bureau, but there's no enforcement mechanism to force people to pay. What's the answer for that?
So let's go back to how the rules are made. So even when it comes from Congress, so you think, Congress, Title 18, they make criminal laws that, you have to pay or you go bankrupt or you have to go to prison or whatever. But if you look at, and again, I can only speak for, and I'm not speaking for the FCC, speaking from my experience at the FCC, we make the law, we make the idea, we make the law, we enforce the law. Something that's not shown here is there's an administrative law judge. So if you don't like our action, we're the judge, we're the judge, not only judge, jury, and executioner, we're the lawmaker, judge, jury, and executioner. And for some reason, Congress felt, for that matter, the framers of the Constitution felt that probably the people who make the rules, enforce the rules, police the rules, enforce the rules, and execute the rules, probably the worst we can do is issue a fine. Now, that said, both directly, we work with the Department of Justice because they can garnish wages and stuff like that. And likewise, if somebody's doing something egregiously illegal, we will work with state attorney generals or Department of Justice because they're probably violating more than Communications Act rules. And, so yeah, you may see things where someone gets slapped with a very large, like robocalling fine, but what they were doing was committing fraud. So then, the state attorney general has also got them up for fraud, which gives them 25 years in prison. Which, it's not ideal. I would love to strangle the robocallers, but, I guess there might be some logic to separation of powers and stuff like that. I thought I saw some students back there. Okay, professor.
I wanted to ask about the implementation of Carey's law and all of that. So one of the issues that arose, and was namely that in PBX land, PBX has last 20 plus years, and as I suspect some of the PBX vendors can attest to, new business is hard to come by. People have it, or if they're a young company, they probably won't even get one, and not even a SIP PBX or whatever. So that means the vast majority of people will probably not implement that. Was there any discussion, as to the likelihood that will actually, this sounded all really good. I'm somewhat skeptical that we'll actually see any difference whatsoever, because it's like ADA implementation. In theory, you should do it. In practice, people don't.
Yeah.
So what are the incentives or thoughts, the economic analysis, which I did not see on the upgradability of legacy stuff?
Chuck and I wrote it. It's there, I promise. Chuck Needy is an economist at the FCC who does like a lot of our public safety stuff. So I can safely dodge this, but to tell a different kind of story, safely dodging it because that was something that we saw right away. But the reason we saw it right away was because Congress in Carey's law told us what to do. They said that, basically, if it'll cost the enterprise money, they don't have to do it. But if it costs a little bit of money or they're buying a new system, then they do have to do it. And, but the thing is, we can't, when I first got there, I was like, well, let's put it in the cost-benefit analysis. And I was told, we really don't want to tell Congress when they're being stupid. That's not good when they allocate the money to run your business, right? So we were constrained by literally the text of Carey's law and Ray Baum's Act. So it was not a giveaway to legacy providers. It was not a giveaway to enterprises. Or if it was done at the congressional level.
Because it said it could cost a little money when you didn't seem to have.
Yeah, and that's where they really, of course, thank you, Congress. It's like, if it costs, and I forget what the adjective was, but it was an adjective. So it's like, okay, now we're into interpretation land. What is a significant upgrade? I think it's, significant upgrade. And what does that mean? Yeah.
I don't know if you want to speculate on that. Do you actually see implementation happening for legacy?
Well, actually, it depends. So I think we have at Georgetown, I think we're one of your customers, and we're doing dispatchable location, and we've been doing notification forever. Now, of course, legacy, it's an IP system. It's probably 15 years old. But can you believe a VoIP system is now, I'm talking about it like it's a legacy system. But yeah, there are people out there with Panasonic key systems, which again, Congress in its infinite wisdom decided to have covered by this. I'm not even sure how physically that would work. But,
I have,
noticeable uptick in the concern. Whether they're actually going to carry through,
yeah,
no pun intended.
right. And the thing that kind of either sucks for you or is a great opportunity with your latest partnership is most people are saying, oh, you know what, I'm not going to buy a new one. I'm just going to go to hosted service. You're
so
loving
a follow-on
it, right?
on that question.
Yeah.
A follow-on is, this is a very clear explanation. Almost
As clear as government
almost
can
as
be.
clear as IMS. But
Yeah.
no,
It does look like the IMS block diagram.
it does.
You're right.
That's why I had to say it. But it's a clear, but I think that there's another factor, not there, which is really what people have started to allude to, public pressure or sentiment outside of this, which can then cause Congress to change its mind or become more enforcement-oriented. But there's also shame and guilt and the threat of lawsuits once this is law and you don't do it and somebody dies. So, I do think we have to remember that we have a responsibility, just as you said at the beginning, to exert that pressure, even though we may not go through all the chain up there. There's one that isn't showing, and I mean, we we are developers and implementers and also citizens of the world and the U.S. And so I think it's really optimistic that they make these rules, and sometimes even if it doesn't have all the teeth it needs, the teeth can be from outside and us. So, you know, I mean, we had this problem, you know, when we were trying to get indoor location, and there's a rule that says that the carriers are supposed to be able to provide it, but really the carriers are kind of dependent on some of the buildings getting smarter than they are, and there's a bunch of people who want to make the buildings smarter, so, you know, it's you follow these, but then you push. So.
Right. And you're going to talk about that tomorrow? Yeah. Today. Right. Yeah, today. That's right. Sorry. More of that coming from someone who actually knows what he's talking about. Hi, Vera.
So FCC and telemarketers, why when I listen to messages, instead of hearing a voice and going delete one time, there are 2 or 3 or 4 of the same message, so that I have to go delete, 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 delete. I mean, so, and I'm like, do they have my number 20 times or something? Why do they?
Yeah, quite. There's a whole market in it, and some people in the room here know David Frankel has a.
Is that against the law?
It's very against the law. And mind you, so from the FCC perspective, we have rules against people making those kinds of calls. But what are they doing? They're calling you, probably trying to scam you, probably trying to illegally get money from you. So the fact that they're perpetrating a fraud, the fact that they're breaking the FCC's telemarketing rules, what do they care? They're already committing a felony. So why not add another fine to it as well? Because up until recently, they're not getting caught.
Another piece of that is that I thought I was being smart or something, because the FCC has that thing where it says, put me on your do not call list, right? And they should do it. So on my intro message, somewhere in there, I say, if this is a telemarketer, please put us on your do not call list. So should there be some kind of way they can distinguish a voice or text my voice to, and then put me on their do not call list?
So
I mean,
actually there are,
inundated.
yeah, and do you guys do that with your call center solutions?
I have more telemarketing calls than I have real calls.
Yeah. Do you guys do that with your call center solutions? I think Aspect does, right?
We do interface with the
Yeah.
It's up to the company. So the list can exist. It's honoring the list.
Right. And
is
again,
where the problem
yeah,
is.
and by the way, you know, you'll notice that we talk about illegal robocalls. I talk about illegal robocalls. About half of automated calls are legal. In fact, who here knows Jonathan Rosenberg? Right? What company does he work for? And what does 5.9 do?
Make phone calls.
Legal robocalls, right? Legal robocalls. If one of his customers, because it's a hosted thing, calls you, they will pick up that you don't want to be on, and you won't get calls from them. Illegal robocallers are like, wow, there's a person at the other end of this line. One of these days, they're going to drop their guard and they're going to get scammed. And it is so inexpensive. We were successful. Over the past 20 years, we were successful in dramatically reducing the cost of communications and making it so easy to create advanced communication applications. Alan, how many high school students were building applications, TADHack?
Across all TADHack?
Well, the communications-focused ones. 20. All right, 2025 high school students. And these were people who are trying to save the world, middle school, right? Saving the world, do food security, all that. But you could also imagine that one of those might be like, wow, I could do a lot of calls and ask people to buy me candy bars. So unfortunately, we succeeded in making it so easy to create these applications. I saw there was somebody, oh yeah.
Hi, Eric. So last year, the FCC ruled that SMS was an information service, not a common carrier service. If I understand the reasoning, it was because it would allow the carriers to do a better job at preventing spam.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I would have in the future is, it seems to me it would it's a decision which is not in the best interests of enterprise messaging, where their concern is in the provenance and security of the data which they collect over SMS. Can you just give me some idea of do you think that's going to be an area that the FCC in the near term will be looking at? Or is that decision going to stick around for a while?
Yeah, so I can't talk for the FCC, but I will take that as a jumping off point. That was one of those items where, like that comment system is not a voting system, because there were a number of hosted, cloud providers to enterprises that do bulk SMS, and a couple of enterprises and a couple of industry associations that use bulk SMS saying, please don't do this. In fact, actually, let's go back even further. That was a petition, right? It was a petition. Please classify SMS as a Title II service. So in fact, it was kind of unclassified. It was in this in-between. They were saying, please make it a Title II. Got all the comments, and at the end of the day, the FCC said, we hear you, we understand there are these concerns, and we are going to classify it as a Title I service. Who knows what this commission or a future commission may do in the future? I don't know. I mean, one thing that happens is that this is a dynamic thing. This is why we have this whole process. The commission believed that carriers maybe needed that clarity to be able to do all the advanced spam and malware and pattern analysis based on history. And it may be that they find in the future that, no, too much legal information is being choked off and we need to readdress it.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good one then. Yeah. All right.
So junk phone calls took my mind to junk email and then junk snail mail. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so as you're talking, I'm thinking, I have more junk calls than real calls,
Mm-hmm.
and I also have more junk snail mail than real mail.
Mm-hmm.
So who handles junk snail mail so that you're not?
I think it's Postal Service, right? And again, it's the same kind of concept in that, there's, it's not wire fraud, but there's like, fraud perpetuated through the mail, so the person gets nailed, hopefully we catch them. Pardon? Mail fraud, thank you. Right, mail fraud. And that's the other thing is, we're doing a lot of stuff that we expect will reduce the amount you're bothered. But, there's been mail fraud for over 150 years. I did have the opportunity to look at the Nigerian 214 scam, which started in like the early 1800s. And it was mail. You would get a letter. I'm, Crown Prince, and I've got to leave the country, and I've got, in those days, I've got $100,000, and, just give me your bank account information. It hasn't gone away. It's morphed with the technology, but they're still trying it over mail as well. So, I mean, it won't go away, but has anyone here gotten a letter, a USPS letter saying, you got one? Wow. So what? So it's not zero, but it's a lot lower than before. So I think, how are we doing for time, Carol?
Yeah, so we've got 5 minutes.
We got 5 minutes. We got 5 minutes. Last chance. Literally last chance, because I'm done in 2 weeks, really. Although you notice I haven't given any answers that talk about what the FCC is going to do or anything like that, because I can't. Yeah, I really can't. Yeah.
I'll give you a tip for robocalls. Go to the internet and download an SIT tone.
That's right.
That's the dee-dee-dee.
Yeah.
And when you get a robocall, you play that tone, chances are the machine is going to put you on a disconnect list.
Yes. Now, I do have to, so as the students here are thinking of the next TAD hack, you as an end user can do whatever you want. You can speak Swedish, you can speak Hungarian, you can sing, you can whistle, you can happen to whistle in sit tones, you can even do modem tones. As a carrier, we're offering a carrier service. Very bad things happen if you lie about signaling. So you can't lie about signaling. But that also reminds me, just my consumer moment here. It's actually the Federal Trade Commission that runs the Do Not Call list, but go to donotcall.gov, register your number. There's consumercomplaints.fcc.gov, where you can register every time you get called, and we ask for stuff like, basically, did they lie about their caller ID? Did they tell you who it was? Did they give you their phone number? Did you have a business relationship with them? Because again, half of these calls are legal, but at least you get to vent about it.
The value of that is if they do get busted one day,
Yes,
those are
that's right.
counts
Yep.
that get applied to
Which, by the way, is how we decide who to go after. Terry.
Yes. Eric, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your service at the FCC. My question is, my T-Mobile account got hacked because somebody took over my profile, and all my calls and SMS was going there. My PayPal account got hacked. My bank account got hacked. And I got a letter from T-Mobile, and it says, due to the FCC so-and-so, I'm sending you this letter to notify you. And it wasn't because they wanted to tell me what happened, or it wasn't because they wanted to provide me with service or whatever. But so can you talk a little bit about the role of the FCC in terms of protecting the consumers? Because I only got the notice because they said it was due to an FCC rule.
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk really generally. I mean, it's in the Communications Act. We act in the public interest. We have a whole CGB, Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, that does nothing but consumer protection, the disability rights community. What else is in CGB? Well, I mean, the government stuff, but what else is in the consumer part? I don't know. Right, yeah, they have, that's where your consumer complaints go. Like if you don't understand your bill, stuff like that. The latest thing in the latest robocall order is, the CGB will be monitoring people's bills to make sure that carriers are not charging for robocall blocking services. That's it's expected that will be a free service. So that's kind of baked into the gestalt of the FCC is consumer protection. I can't talk to the T-Mobile case, but it would not surprise me that especially if there is a regulation, they want to make sure that they put that in the letter. It's not for your benefit, it's for their benefit. In case there's a consumer action, they want to be able to say, oh, we followed the rules. Look, we even told the consumer. But I can't talk about your particular situation. But I think we're good. Thank you very much.